All right, guys, today is Monday, and this is our last unit. So we are going to be looking at scatter plots. First thing we want to do is talk about what a scatter plot actually is. So in that little definition there, and by the way, that's me, this just says that a scatter plot helps us to visualize the comparison between two sets of data. We use them to be able to see relationships between data, determine if there is a trend, and then use them to predict future data. Sometimes we have clusters where coordinates are grouped together. Other times we have an outlier. This is a data point that just doesn't quite fit in with the others. All of this helps us paint a bigger picture of what's happening. So, we have 6 different scatter plots here, which means we just have some things that are plotted on the coordinate plane. Generally, you're going to notice that these are all happening within the first quadrant of the coordinate plane where the x and the y values are all positive. That doesn't have to be the case. You might have some negatives here and there, but for the most part, we're going to see the first quadrant. So the way I've grouped these together is, if you notice in the first row right here, each of those 3 scatter plots are showing what kind of looks like we could draw a line in. So if you notice this one, it's comparing inches of snow versus hours of a storm. So this one kind of makes it seem like these two things are related. So the more inches of snow you have, maybe that means the longer a storm you had. So we draw what we call a positive trend line. So as the x value increases, the y value also increases. You might see this weird point way out here though. Maybe somebody measured wrong, or maybe there was just a storm that didn't get much snow because maybe it rained afterwards. But either way, this is what we call an outlier in our data. It doesn't quite fit the other data. It doesn't really follow that trend line. Let's look at the next one. We are looking at days in quarantine versus hours of schoolwork. It's not quite as tightly fit as the last graph, but we can still kind of see this trend happening, right? It's kind of decreasing. So maybe as time goes on in quarantine, maybe we get less and less homework assignments. I don't really see any outliers there, but what I do see is we've got a lot of data all clustered together, especially right there. So we're going to say we've got a cluster of data, and it's all happening right here, somewhere between maybe 4 and 6 days of quarantine. We've got a lot of data there. So we've got a negative linear trend. Now, in my next one, we're looking at weeks of school and somebody's GPA. These are pretty consistent. There's a little dip here on week 6. But for the most part, we could probably draw us a nice little line here and say, this person's pretty consistent. As the weeks go on through school, they've kept their GPA right at 4.0. We call this a constant rate of change because as the x value continues, the y value didn't change. It didn't go up, it didn't go down. So those 3 things have linear trends. We've got a positive, meaning as the x increases, the y increases. We have a negative where the x increases and the y decreases. And then we have a constant where the x increases but the y doesn't change at all. The next 3 are non-examples of a linear scatter plot, which means they're still scatter plots. You might still even see a trend. They just don't form lines. Let's look at this one. We're looking at somebody's age versus how many hours they play Minecraft. If you'll notice, when somebody is 0 or 1 or 2, even 3 years old, they really don't play any Minecraft at all, which makes sense. But we've got this spike. So it kind of goes up. It looks like in this, that between the ages of maybe 5 and 8, that's when you play the most Minecraft. Do you see that big spike? But then it doesn't keep going up, it goes back down. So it looks like maybe by the time somebody reaches 10, maybe the average kid doesn't play Minecraft all day anymore. But look at this level. Look at this. 7.5 hours worth of Minecraft at 7 years old. Sounds about accurate. So it definitely has a trend, but it's just not linear. Next one, we're looking at the cases of coronavirus in May of 2020. So I definitely see a trend there. I could form a pattern, right? It's just not linear. It seems like it starts, pretty gradual. Then it starts to build, but then it really starts to build, and then it grows really fast. That's called an exponential growth. I can't make a line out of it, because if I drew a line, it really wouldn't estimate that data, because it's more of a curve. So that means it's growing exponentially. So not linear, but still a trend. The final graph we have here is looking at the number of trees somebody has in their yard versus their stockpile of rolls of toilet paper. There's dots all over the place. We've got plenty of data, but it does not look like there's any trend. Somebody who has 1 tree in their yard has 1 roll of toilet paper. Somebody that has 2 trees has 8 rolls or 0 rolls or 2.5 rolls. There's dots all over the place. So I am not able to make a prediction here. I can't draw a trend line. So I'm going to say there is no correlation. Not only just not linear, but there's just no relationship, which makes sense. You wouldn't expect there to be a relationship between the number of trees you have in your yard and the number of toilet paper rolls you have. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is you guys are going to take a look at these 4 graphs, and all you need to do is go through them and determine if they form a linear relationship or not. If they do, I want you to draw a trend line. If they don't, I want you to just say no trend. If you happen to see any outliers or clusters, you should identify those also. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. So if there's a linear trend, I'm going to draw a line in. If I see any outliers, I will point them out. If you guys would like to do this on your own, now's the time to hit pause and come back when you're done. Those of you that are sticking with me here, number 1, this is talking about hours worked and your grade. This looks like a definite positive trend to me. So I'm going to draw that trend line in. You could probably try to argue that maybe that is an outlier. So 1 hour of work and you get a 70, but it's not too far off the data. So I'm not really going to identify that as an outlier right now. So this one, I would say that is linear and it's got a positive trend. And I am not going to formally identify any outliers or clusters. Number 2, they already drew one in. So I'm going to say, yeah, that's definitely linear. It's got a negative trend, which just means that as X increases, Y decreases, so it's going down. I really don't see any outliers in this. It's not quite as tight as the other one, so like some of these points are kind of far out, but they're really not outliers. I think the only case of an outlier would be like maybe somebody who watches 20 hours of TV and scored 100. That would be an outlier. All right, number 3, we are looking at the average daily temperature and the visitors at a beach. I think this one's got a nice positive trend here. I'm going to draw myself in a nice linear trend line, and I'm going to say, yep, this is linear. And it's definitely positive. I don't really see any clusters. I don't really see any outliers. One thing I would like to point out though, that this domain, so between 80 and 96 degrees Fahrenheit is when they have surveyed how many people are at the beach. But I would assume that as you get further at like 100 or over 100 degrees, I have a feeling these numbers are going to drop off. So within this domain, right, up to 96 degrees, this makes sense. After that, I don't think this data is going to make sense anymore. Finally, number 4, I definitely see a trend, right? It's doing this, but then it goes back down. So this is definitely not linear. And even though I don't really think there's any outliers, we probably should notice this interesting little bump right here. This happens during summer months, so maybe people are buying books to go on vacation. Either way, it's not linear. We don't really have any outliers. There's not really any clusters, but there is still a trend. That's it.